Here we go. Derech Mitzvosecha. Issur Sinas Yisroel, Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel, prohibition of hating another Jew, mitzvah to love another Jew. We learned that there's mitzvahs in the Torah. They shouldn't hate your brother in your heart. Sefer Chinuch explains, hate in the heart leads to bad behaviors. There's also mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love someone, you have to love them down to the soul level. That will lead to many good behaviors. Once we understood what that is, we got into the whole story with Hillel and the potential convert. It says, teach me the whole Torah on foot. Hillel says, what's hateful to you, don't do to somebody else. That's the whole Torah. Everything else is interpretation. Go study it. We have two questions. How is this the whole Torah, and why does Hillel phrase it like this? The first thing that we learn is that it is the entire Torah, and there's something curious about that because we have to take upon ourselves saying Hareini, that I will love a fellow Jew before I daven, which davening is between me and God, where are the people coming into it? But ultimately what we come to is that because davening is in place of karbanos, in place of the sacrifices, and a sacrifice, the one who offers, the Kohen who offers the sacrifice on behalf of the individual, sacrifice itself can't have a blemish. And because the Jewish people, whether or not we see it, we are an interconnected whole, we are an interconnected entity, we are considered like a one-man unit, so whether or not we see it, the same way that we know our hand and our foot are part of the same body, even though they're two totally separate organs. There's veins pumping blood to both of them. God forbid somebody stops a blood flow somewhere, it's going to affect. Higher level souls can notice if there's something wrong with one part of the body. The same way that the soul and the brain can detect, read pain, read all the kind of stuff that's going on within the body. Just because we don't recognize it doesn't mean it's not true, and it is true. If a person rejects someone, especially out of baseless hatred, then they are creating a defect within themselves, and now you're going to come stand before God in prayer, you're going to declare God is one, when you don't accept the fact that one means that we're all part of one entity. How can you do this? That's how we see that it actually does make sense to say Hareini before davening, because it does underlie your relationship with God. Because davening, you're going to proclaim that God is one. How can you do that? We've rejected a part of yourself. You've rejected the truth of what God has created, the interconnected entity that is all subsumed within the Godness. The second thing that we said is, why does Hillel phrase it in the negative? We have the idea of ein adam rocha v'las, what person doesn't see fault within himself. The same way that your own faults, you kind of blur the edges of it. This is sort of what we have to do to somebody else. You could see that someone else has a fault, but an emotional state doesn't have to follow from there. Kind of the same way that you do for people that you like. We do this all the time for people that we like. They're a trait, oh, I can't stand this trait, whatever. And then you'll notice that actually people in your inner circle might actually have it. So when it's somebody in your inner circle, you kind of laugh about it, you tease them about it, but everybody moves on. You don't always get agitated unless you're necessarily in a state of agitation. But when it comes to other people, you're like, shape up, I cannot stand this behavior. And what's going on here? But because we're in circle, love blurs the edges. The same way you definitely do that for yourself, you should extend it to other people. I notice that there's a fault here, but let's all move on. It's okay. Everybody's got their thing. All this has to do, Ahavas Yisroel in general, how is this the entire Torah? And everything else is commentary, because Ahavas Yisroel is what effectuates the connection between Kucha B'richu, the higher aspect of God that is removed from the world, with Shechina, the part that dwells within the world, that creates the world, Joshua Malchus, the source of our Jewish souls. There's a full alignment connection that happens there. Someone's causing disunity, God forbid, not only they're going to put themselves under the microscope, but they're not going to allow for that full alignment to happen. This is what the whole Torah is all about, because every time you do a mitzvah, you create the alignment. So Ahavas Yisroel effectuates on that sort of all-encompassing sort of level, and the other mitzvahs only do it on a singular sort of level. And we're seeing an example of that now with the mitzvah of talis and appointing a king. Also, we see that when we extend this sort of behavior to somebody else, that we let the self-love that we have for our own self extend to true self-love, which is loving somebody else. We see that God will behave that way toward us. We see that God blesses us when we're all united, etc., etc. Many wonderful things about Ahavas Yisroel. If to get more details of it, please see previous classes. So now we're in the middle of chapter 41 of Tanya, which is explaining the idea of how does the mitzvah of talis connect to the mitzvah of appointing a king. The central idea of it is it has to do with fear of God, that the talis enwraps someone, and there's a certain level reached that we want to stay enwrapped within that level, that the talis is going to be able to effectuate that level. And it has to do with appointing a king. Part of what we're understanding here within this whole description of chapter 41 is that we have to serve God. When we talk about serving God, the literal word of service of God must come from fear. Love of God is very important, of course, for divine service. Fear is integral to it also. And it's different relationships. So here the relationship that's at play is servant to master, servant to the king. That we have to recognize that God being the king of everything, and not in an abstract way, but in a way as if we literally could see God before us. Not only when we're davening, but we have to recognize that the whole world is his domain. Wow, that's a pretty powerful king that rules over the entire world, universe, everything that we know of existence. On the best level, best case scenario, we should be feeling that fear in our heart to the extent that it's going to be affecting our actions. Literal fear in the heart. It should be a palpable fear. We can't necessarily get ourselves to that level through meditation, contemplation, etc. At least we should experience it in our minds. We should recognize on an intellectual level that we should have this sort of fear for God. This sort of mindset, again, it's not only for davening, of course, it's for all times, but it's also before someone does a mitzvah in particular. Before this specific mitzvah, to get yourself in the proper mindset of service, accepting the yoke, submitting to heaven, etc. You should have that even before you do a particular mitzvah. And it mentioned already the mitzvahs of talis and tefillin, what they're indicative of, what they represent. What we ended up with last time was what tefillin effectuates. So you have it on your head because you're submitting the mind, you have it on the arm, submitting the heart. Now it continues. Mitzvas tzitzis is talking about putting on the tzitzis. While putting on the tzitzis, one should bear in mind what is written in the Zohar, namely that he should draw upon himself his blessed kingdom, which is the kingdom over all worlds, and endeavor to focus God's kingdom specifically over ourselves through this mitzvah. As tzitzis is particularly effective in enhancing one's acceptance of the yoke of heaven. This is similar to the mitzvah, you shall surely set a king over yourself. This is the verse that we saw above. The verse implies that he had no king and now sets the king over himself. Person who puts on tzitzis, and if we're not putting on tzitzis, we we can experience this even without necessarily putting on the tzitzis, is that I am now going to appoint a king over myself. King, obviously, capital K, talking about God. It has it for tzitzis because the way that the strands and the knots of the tzitzis are done, there's a particular method for it that it ends up, through computations, it ends up to 613. Literally, wearing tzitzis is supposed to remind the wearer of the mitzvahs. That's why I talk about accepting the yoke of heaven. I'm on a mission and a mandate that this is what my life is actually geared toward. In such a case, i.e. having contemplated this matter, that even though after all this meditation, no dread or fear descends upon him in a manifest manner in his heart, nevertheless, since he accepts the kingdom of heaven upon himself and draws upon himself the fear of him in his conscious, capital H, of him, in his conscious thought and rational volition, and this submission is beyond doubt a sincere one, for it is the nature of all Jewish souls not to rebel against the blessed kingdom. The Torah he studies or the mitzvah he performs because of his submission to the heavenly yoke, and because of the fear that he has drawn into his mind, are turned complete service of the kind that can result only from a fear of God, like all service performed by a servant for his master or king. All this can be accomplished by awakening, even if only in his mind, at least a minimal level of fear, and utilizing it in Torah study and mitzvah observance. Before you're doing this particular mitzvah, or before all the mitzvahs, you should have the idea of appointing the king upon yourself. This should be something that affects you to the heart level. We always want it to affect you in the motive state because that's going to lead to action, as in your actions will be different now when it's in this sort of state. However, if you can't reach that sort of level, I recognize it intellectually, but the heart's not feeling it like that. Not because it's not sincere, but because we're not making that connection. We might not be on the level of making that connection. Then this is still good. Not just good, it's considered sincere. The Alter Rebbe also says because ultimately every Jew wants to obey God and not rebel against him. If you remember in Tanya, we learned about how the hidden love, if there's a spiritual crisis, if it thinks that it's being separated from God, that hidden love is going to flare up and will never ever allow a Jew to be separated from God. Which is why sometimes we differentiate between transgressions. We think like, oh, this transgression is not as bad as this one. See what the punishment is. That's not so bad. But we have to go to the step before that. The punishment is just whatever has to be rectified for it. But the step before that, the transgression itself, is a separation, a moment of separation from God, no matter what the transgression is. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe offers a mindset, if we need it, if we're not yet at the level of other methods of keeping away from transgression, that we should see every temptation for transgression as a spiritual crisis moment. Because in reality, there is a moment of separation that occurs. So that's why I'm saying here, ultimately, even if we can't necessarily get it to that deep, heartfelt level, it's still a sincere aspect of the service, and it's calling it Avodah Shlema, it's calling it a complete service. You have a complete level of fierce service for God. This is not so if one studies Torah and fulfills a mitzvah with love alone attached to him through his Torah and his mitzvah. We want love of God, and that should be a driving, motivating factor, but only having love of God without fear is not called complete service. We're not saying that it's not good. Of course it's good. But if we want to reach the level of complete service, then you also have to have fear and not only love, because love doesn't get us to that level of submission to the yoke of heaven, of appointing upon yourself a king. That's not the love relationship. This is not called service of a servant, whereas the Torah has declared, you shall serve Havai Elokechem, V'avadtem es Hashem Elokechem. So why are we so stuck on this term of service? We're so stuck on this fear thing. It's because this is what the Torah says, that you have to have service of God. A verb from the noun eved, servant, signifying service motivated by fear and awe of Hashem. Likewise, him shall you serve, tavodu. These two verses of V'avadtem es Hashem Elokechem and V'osas tavodu, it's both from the root of eved. Eved is a servant, and a servant serves. If we want to reach the level that we could call what you have done is service in accordance with these verses, then we have to have the fear factor must be involved in it. As explained in the Zohar, Parshat Bahar, just like the ox of which one first places a yoke in order to make it useful to the world, so too must a human being first of all submit to the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, and only then engage in divine service. And if this submission is not found in him, holiness cannot rest within him. And in Rayim Nehemna, it is written that every man must in his divine service belong to two categories and levels, namely the category of a servant who serves out of fear and the category of a son who serves out of love. This we've seen before. We've seen that there's a difference between the relationships, a servant to master and child to parent. One's fear-based and one's love-based. If you want to be able to say, yes, I fulfilled all these aspects of the Torah, you will have to have the fear-based aspect. You have to have the servant to master. Here, it's telling us what the Zohar says. For an ox to be useful, it first has to submit to the yoke. Because you have an ox, a very powerful animal with a lot of potential. But that potential is not channeled, it's not used for anything. If you just, okay, ox, do something. If you want to channel the strength of an ox, you got to put a yoke on it. And then it can plow the field, transport stuff you, whatever you want it to do. The same thing is for us. We have great potentials. We have great energies, great abilities. If there's not something to channel it, then those abilities, who knows what will be with them? Maybe yes, maybe no, wasted, not wasted, who knows? So the ox, you put the yoke on it, and a person has to accept the yoke of heaven upon themselves. As in, I recognize that this is the structure through which all my talents and abilities, I recognize that this is the structure through which I will be operating. And the act of submitting to the yoke is a fear-based pathway. It's like something without rules. Someone can be very talented, and you're like, what do you want me to make? Make anything! That's not helpful. If you're like, well, I'm envisioning something specific, okay, now I've got something to work with. This quote-unquote rule, this quote-unquote box that I'm giving you is actually more helpful to you. We're not like, oh my god, all rules are terrible. Not really. Okay, and although one may find a son who is also a servant, so it doesn't preclude it, a son can act in service through fear also, in a positive sense. It is impossible to attain this level without the prerequisite of the higher level of fear and awe known as Yireh, as is known to the initiated. If one loves God but lacks fear of him, his spiritual service will not be of the kind that the Torah calls avoda. Again, why do you want avoda? Because we saw the verses that say you shall serve God. It uses that terminology. Should he fail in his attempts to awaken fear of God in his heart, he should at least awaken a feeling of fear and awe in his mind. We want intellectual if we can't feel it on the motive level. And what if one who finds it impossible to awaken even intellectual awe? What if even that's hard for you? Sure, I hear what you're saying, but it doesn't resound. We're not connecting to it. As this individual meditates upon the above mentioned concepts, and furthermore, his intent during the Torah study and mitzvah observance is to serve God, these are therefore also deemed a completely valid form of service. So what we're getting to is that we have ideal stages, but if you can't reach the ideal stages, if you are sincerely engaging in the work that should be getting you there, then this is good for you. Not in a negative sense. And like, yes, we see that you've maximized and that you've reached where you can reach. So you don't have to be despondent, especially when you know that you're sincerely engaged in this pathway. Furthermore, even in the case of an individual who in his mind and thought feels no fear or shame, i.e. an individual not moved by contemplating how Hashem uniquely bestows his kingdom upon him, or by considering that Hashem is scrutinizing him to see if he serves him as is fitting, the God's not just paying attention to you, but he sees what's going on in their kishkis, on account of the limited grade of his soul, originating in the lowest degrees of the 10th spirit of Asiya, the lowest of the 4 worlds. As in, it's possible that a person's not achieving the state because their soul is not necessarily a higher level soul, it's a lower level soul. That's not to say there's something incomplete about them, it's to say that their spiritual sensitivity, the heights that they could achieve in spiritual terms, is not the same as other people. That's why you have to do according to what you can do. But you have to know if you're doing according to what you can do, if you're just trying to skate through something. Moreover, within this world itself, it originates from the lowest degrees of the 10th sphere that span it, thus he finds it impossible to reveal within himself a sensitivity to godliness to experience even intellectual fear of God. We can take people in context of where they're coming from spiritually. Basically, don't freak out about the result when you know that the method is correct in this particular regard. Nevertheless, since he is intent in his service to serve the king, this is complete service. As in, you can still say, yes, I did this level, because your intent, as in what you're gearing toward, is correct, whether or not it manifests as wholly as it should be manifesting, as thoroughly as it should be manifesting. For fear and service are counted as 2 mitzvahs of the total 613, and they do not exclude each other. Thus, although he fails to fulfill the mitzvah of fearing God, for fear must be felt in the heart, at the very least in the mind, he is nevertheless able to fulfill the precept of divine service through studying Torah and observing mitzvot with the intention of thereby serving God as king. Maybe you didn't reach this particular level of fear, so this particular aspect of the mitzvah is not fulfilled. You could concentrate on the other mitzvah, be taking you in context of who you are. Although this person fails to experience fear even in his mind, since he thinks about ideas which should evoke fear, he is fulfilling the command of fearing God. Because of the effort, intellectually, I'm doing things correctly, for you, this is good. Furthermore, in truth, he not only fulfills the obligation of service, he also fulfills the mitzvah of fearing God through introducing the fear into his thought. For at this hour and moment, at any rate, there rests upon him the fear of heaven, at least like one's fear in the presence of an ordinary mortal, not a king, who is watching him when he would refrain from doing anything unseemly in the other's eyes. We're kind of going lower in the stages, but it recalibrates each time. And here it's saying, like, look, at least if you have the fear in your mind, if you can't fear God as the king of all kings and the ultimate entity ruling over everything, etc., at least recognizing having some measure of fear in your mind is still going to be okay. And it's talking about here specifically about a mortal. We're going to see a story now from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a very great sage. He lived during the times of the Roman siege of Jerusalem, leading up to the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. He was in the city of Jerusalem during the siege. The Zealots had locked the city in. They had warring factions within the Jewish people during that time, because the Jewish people would have had enough to outlast the Roman siege, they say, for like 20-something years, 21 years or something. Nakdima ben Gurion and all those people. So they had all these warehouses, but the Zealots were, we will neither make peace nor will we not fight. Everyone must be forced to fight. So they basically burned down the warehouses because they're trying to force everybody to engage in the battle, which a lot of people died of starvation during that time. Aside from disease, starvation, it's absolutely terrible. It actually connects to this because that's part of why the exile has been so long, because senseless hatred is so hard to weed out. We'll see more about that in the next section. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai recognizes what's going on, and he pretended to die, and he had his students carry him out of the city. You can't have an unburied body just sitting around in Jerusalem. You got to get him out. We don't believe that he's actually dead. Miracle, whatever. They get him out, and he goes straight to Vespasian. Vespasian is the one before Titus. Titus is the one who destroys the temple. Vespasian is the general before him. So take him out to Vespasian, and as soon as he comes out, he's bound to Vespasian. Oh, mighty emperor, what are you doing? Why are you bound to me? And he's like, well, you're the emperor now. And he's like, what? Within minutes, he all of a sudden gets a message. By the way, the emperor's dead. You're the new emperor. So, okay, I'll give you 3 things. There is discussion about whether or not Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked for the right things. He said, don't destroy the family of King David. He wanted a doctor for Rabbi Tzedek, someone who had fasted 40 years to try to prevent the destruction of Jerusalem. And he said, Tenli Yavne v'chachameh. Give me the city of Yavne and all the sages there. So some people, why didn't he ask for Jerusalem at that point? Maybe he recognized he couldn't have asked for Jerusalem. Anyways, even this simple expression is called fear, as in the fear of another mortal, not the same as fear of the capital K king, not the fear of God himself, on fear of God, but just having fear of another mortal. So even this simple expression is called fear. It's considered a base level, but okay. As Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his disciples, may it be God's will that the fear of heaven be upon you like the fear of a human being. What? That's it? Whereupon his disciples protested, no more than this. He responded, this is indeed a true form of fear. For you know that when a person commits a sin, he says to himself, may no one see me. As in, the disciples are, really? That's the fear that you want us to achieve? And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying, at least you should have this level of fear. The same way that if someone's about to do something wrong, the same way that someone looks both ways to make sure no one else is seeing them, at least you should have that in mind when faced with temptation for transgression. Such fear, held Rabbi Yochanan, would ensure restraint from sin. So it's duly designated fear of heaven because it distances a person from sin. Even this level is still considered fear because it still keeps you away from transgression. It's not what we're aiming for, but this too is good because the result is a good result. Accordingly, attaining this level of fear through meditation amounts to proper fulfillment of the mitzvah to fear God. So maybe you can't feel fear in your heart of God the way that you should. Maybe you can't get to the point of intellectual fear of God as you should. But at least if you have a level of fear that's going to prevent you from sin, then this is also fear for you on your level. Such fear, however, is termed yirat tata, a lower level of fear, and yirat chet, a fear of sin, which precedes wisdom as its fear of transgressing rather than fear of God himself, while the higher fear is a shamefaced fear, being abashed over on God's presence. Remember we said that fear of punishment is self-serving because it's like, I don't want to suffer. It's good if it's going to keep you from transgressing, but it's just a starter point. We want you to go to a level higher than that. Your fear shouldn't just be like, oh my God, I don't want to sin because I'm going to go to hell. Fine, okay, we got the result that we wanted, but fear can take you to a much higher level. To the sense of fear before the greatness of God, the majesty of God. The same way that you stand before something that's so grand and you're just, wow, I am so tiny before the vastness. I'm so tiny before the greatness of things. That's a higher level of fear of who am I, this tiny entity, to stand before the greatness. For there are two kinds of fear. The lower level, which leads to the performance of Torah mitzvot, that would be the level of fear of servant to master, of accepting the yoke kind of level. The servant does as the master wishes. And the higher level, which results from the proper performance of Torah mitzvot. One, the lower level leads to performance of Torah mitzvot. I can do what I'm supposed to do, or there's going to be trouble to pay. And then once you reach that level, now you can get to an even higher level. And that's the level that comes after you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Now you can reach a much higher level. Without any fear at all, however, one's fulfillment of Torah mitzvot does not soar on high to the supernal sphere through love alone, just as a bird cannot fly with one wing, for fear and love are the two wings as stated in Tikkun Azar. We've learned that a lot. The mitzvah is the bird is an entity, but if we want the bird to fly, we have to give it wings. The bird is still kosher. Regardless of the state of the wings, the bird itself is kosher. And this is a halachic thing. Love and fear are the wings that allow mitzvah to fly higher. So that connects the idea of kavana, intention, motivation in what you're doing. That's what gives the bird wings. Again, one way or the other, you still have the mitzvah. But if we want it to be a soaring mitzvah, not just a home, but a bright home, we want to give it wings. So the bird can't fly with only one wing. So love is very nice. Love is very good. We want love, deep, true kind of love for God. You need the second wing if it's going to truly fly. And that second wing is fear. The spiritual wings of love and fear elevate the Torah mitzvot performed within them to the supernal sphere. It's going to go to higher levels. When one lacks fear and acts only out of love, he has one wing, making it impossible for his Torah mitzvot to soar on high. Similarly, fear alone is but one wing, and one's service cannot ascend with it on high, even though it is termed the service of a servant. Duly motivated by awe or fear, for there must also be the service of a son motivated by love to awaken at least a natural love for God, hidden in one's heart, so that he should at least become conscious of it in his mind, to recall his love of the one God and his thought and his desire to attach to him. Same way you can only have love, you shouldn't only have fear. Only serving God out of fear is also not good. You also have to have the love. You have to remember, we want both wings. And here it even says also the same thing with the love. Obviously, we want to feel it in the heart that it's going to get to a motive state that it's going to lead to action. If not, we want to have the intellectual level. Nothing else. Recall to mind, the child-to-parent relationship could integrate the level of love also. This should be his intent when occupying himself with Torah or particular mitzvah, that his divine soul as well as his vivifying soul, that would be your godly soul and your animal soul, your godly soul, your natural soul, together with their garments shall attach to him as has been explained above. As in the all of me, the entire entity of me, we shall attach to God like this. We should unify with God. Remember, we're talking about the unity stuff. In summary, a Jew's divine service must embrace both that of a son who serves his father out of love and that of a servant who serves his master out of fear and awe. A Jew's spiritual service also includes the goal of becoming one with all the Jewish people. Okay, so now it adds in a new level. First of all, you have you and your pathway of uniting with God, love and awe, etc. Now, there's a collective unifying that we want to keep in mind. Thus, his intention should not be limited to have his own soul's connection, but also that the source of his soul and the source of all the souls of Israel connect with him. We're going to see right now that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the part of God that's separate from the world, and Shekhinah, the lower aspect. We want complete unity. So that's not only for me, that's something that benefits the collective, the whole world, the Lord. By doing so, the individual brings about the union, the yichud of the higher and lower levels of godliness. Kutcher Brichu, remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, which is the source of Torah mitzvos, and a Shekhinah, which we call the divine presence, which is the source of all Jewish souls respectively. We shouldn't only intend that I'm going to unite with God, we want this macrocosm of unity to happen as well. This explains the concluding phrase recited before the performance of certain mitzvos for the sake of the union of Kutcher Brichu with the Shekhinah in the name of all Israel. We saw this verse of L'Shem Yuchot Kutcher Brichu Shechinte. And the name of all Israel implies that the union achieved through the performance of the mitzvahs for the sake of it in the name of all Israel. It's not just for me, I'm doing this for the peoples, for the man that we were all part of. For it's with the Shekhinah that Kutcher Brichu is united, and the Shekhinah is the source of all all Jewish souls. We're connecting that part of God that's separate, that's higher than the realms, with the source of where we're coming from. So that means it's for all of us. Yet, in fact, the sages of blessed memory have said that a man should never separate himself from the community. A person should not separate himself from the community. You also have in Pirkei Avos, Al Tifresh Min HaTzibur, don't separate yourself. The community is uniting in one thing, but I'll do my own thing. No. Therefore, we should intend to unite and attach to him, blessed be he, the source of his divine soul, in addition, the source of all the souls of Israel. Right? We all come from the same source, so let's have a full attachment going on here. This source being the spirit of his mouth, called by the name Shechina, because Shechina, Malchus, is the mouth. Because it dwells Shochered and clothes itself in all worlds, animating them and giving them existence, and is the Shechina, which imbues him with the power of speech to utter his current words of Torah, or with the power of action to perform the particular commandment at hand. Why is it the Shechina that gives the power? Because the Shechina is what creates. That's why it's the feminine aspect, because women create. That's what we do. We make life. One should thus intend to become united with the infinite Ein Sof light through speaking words of Torah or performing a mitzvah. For the Shechina is the source of his power of speech and action, as well as the source of his divine soul and the souls of all Israel. The Shechina, which gives you the power to do all these things, that we should intend to unite with this higher level of God. This union is stated through drawing forth the light of the blessed Ein Sof here below by being occupied in the Torah Mitzvos, wherein the light of the Ein Sof is closed. Torah Mitzvos is going to affect this unity. What we want is for you to have the intention also of it. So not just knowing that it's a byproduct of what you're doing, we want you to have the intention that this is going to result from what you're doing. And he should be intent on drawing his blessed light over the source of his soul and of the souls of all Israel, so as to unite them with him. This then is the meaning of for the sake of the union of Kutcher Brichu with the Shechina in the name of all Israel. So that's L'Shem Yichot Kutcher Brichu, Shechinte, etc. B'Shem Kol Yisrael. Mitzvah observance unites Kutcher Brichu, as in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the source of Torah Mitzvah, with the Shechina in the name of all the Jewish people. For the Shechina is the source of all their souls. Additionally, much more than the union of divine souls and Hashem is accomplished through Torah mitzvahs. We have more that's going on here. You have to understand what Torah mitzvahs does. Look at how much is happening here. These also bring about amtakat hadinim, the tempering, the sweetening of the harsh judgment and gvurut, and their transformation into kindness and chasadim, effected through the merging of the supernal sphere of chesed and gvura. Opposite by nature, chesed and gvura, that's kindness and strictness, giving and withholding, kindness and might, are fused into one through the revelation and diffusion of divine light, spiritually superior to both. The whole unity thing, there's so many things that are being united, and one of the things that are being united are these two opposites of chesed and gvura, kindness and strength. When these two unite, what dominates, what becomes the stronger factor is not strength itself, is kindness. Kindness then dominates. This, what's called hamtakat hadinim, it makes the judgments, things that are supposed to come about, become sweetened, because the chesed is going to take over now. The chesed is going to infuse it. It's like adding something sweet to a tart dish, kind of. The sweetness is going to overpower. It's going to sweeten the whole thing. This light is the supernal will drawn down upon these attributes through the performance of Torah mitzvahs. For as Torah and mitzvahs are expressions of the divine will, their spirituality far surpasses the spirituality of the spirit of chesed and gvura. Why is this happening? Because we're reaching unities on very high levels, and because of that, there's almost like a trickle-down effect of everything being positively affected from it. When the divine will, the source of supernal kindness, is revealed through Torah study and mitzvah observance, the attributes of kindness and severity are united, and severity is transformed into kindness. So ultimately, we see that there's many benefits that come from it. There's you submitting to God, there's the unity aspect of Kutcher Brichu and Shechina, and then we see also that severity might gets tempered, it gets sweetened. Okay, so wrapping up what we just did here, the whole thing with the mitzvah of the talis. So this is from Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, im en chachma en yir, im en yir en chachma. This is part of a saying. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would say, if there's no wisdom, there's no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom. What does it mean if there's no fear? If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom. If there's no fear, an or makif, an encompassing light, that's a light that can't be contained, so it surrounds us. It's just around, it can't be drawn in. Is elicited by the talis evokes fear of God. As in, the same way that a person wraps themselves in the talis, it's that encompassingness that they're drawing down. If there's no fear, there's no chachma. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. That's that last part of that line there. What does it mean that there's no chachma? It means that there's no bittul, self-nullification, which allows one to be a receptor. Chachma, remember, is chochma, the potential, the power of what? The potential to also be a nothingness, because that's the point above our own intellect. Chachma is the ability to perceive truth as truth is, and that truth is God Almighty. Remember also that we said that the hidden love within a person is in chachma, because that's a place that can't be tainted by ego. There's no bittul, self-nullification. If there's no fear, as in if we don't have this encompassing light of fear of God around us, then that will not lead us then to submission to Him. We will not have the bittul, the self-nullification aspect. And being bittul, if you remember, all the way when we did the sikha about Yitzchak and Abraham, the less of a something I am, the more room there is for somebody else in the equation. How do you get to 9? 5 plus 4, 6 plus 3. So what number are you in the equation? But you could also get to 9, 0 plus 9. So I could be 0 and 9 being the infinite fills the rest of the space. Being a receptor means I'm open now to take in what's being given to me. But if I'm asserting ego and self, I'm not a receptor now. I'm not open now to divine light, whatever is going to come down. If there's no chachma, there's no fear. Chachma is in wisdom. One the other. The higher level of fear following chachma, which is an absolute bittul from closest to Hashem. Each of the levels that bring us, putting ourselves more and more aside, actually end up drawing us closer to God. Characteristic of fear is that the closer one gets, the more he is overcome with bittul. What is it about fear? The thing about fear is that the closer I get to you, the greater my fear becomes. If someone is someone that I'm so much in awe of, the closer I draw to them, the more of a nothing I feel. I get smaller and smaller the closer I get to you. Versus the characteristic of love, however, is distance makes the love stronger. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Right here. Think about love is that distance can increase that love, actually. You have more love to fill the space. Fear drawn closer to you, the closer I get to something, the closer you get to the edge, the scarier it is. It's very nice to see the ditch from very far away, but you get closer to it, you're going to get more and more afraid. And that makes you smaller and smaller. Here we're talking about before God Almighty. The closer you get, the more of a nothing we feel. So, thus, after the bittul stemming from Chachma, as in, once we have the wisdom, and that leads us to being less of a something, saying Echad will instill awe from absolute bittul. Now, imagine taking this level that you reach. I feel so much of a nothing because I'm so full of fear, feeling fear in a positive sense that I am such a tininess before the greatness. Now go and daven with that. Now you go and you say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Echad, Hashem Echad, when you're going to proclaim that God is one. Imagine where you're doing it from that state of being. Not only are you going to know it and believe it, but imagine what you're going to feel like in that moment. And imagine what that effectuates versus when you're just kind of saying it when you're not in that state of being. So the core point of this impression invests in the encompassing light of the talis, inspiring him with the external fear which precedes Chachma. Preliminary level, as in it's going to get you to level 1, is part of the talis. The whole thing of the talis is that's going to get you up to that level. So now you're going to be on the pathway to get to that ultimate level. The talis relays the impressions of the spiritual heights attained through previous recitations of Shema. Talis then acts almost as like an energy storage unit. That when you get yourself up to this level, you're going to say Echad and Shema, the talis is going to hold on to that energy. The person's going to wrap themselves in the talis, they're going to have the impression of it moving forward. All this is only an explanation, as in a commentary on the unity of the soul's Chachma when he offers his soul to Hashem and saying Echad, representing the mystic secret of unity. Remember what we said? That Ahavas Yisroel does it on an all-encompassing level. Every other mitzvah does it only on a singular level. So everything that we've just described is to tell us why talis achieves it in one sort of way. That's why it's only a commentary, because it only gets us there in one avenue, in one aspect. The fundamental dimension of this unity is brought about through the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. For then, you are entirely beautiful, my beloved, and you shall be tamim, you shall be complete with Havaya Elokecha. Why does Ahavas Yisroel achieves it on the most fundamental level? Because it's not just about all this fear factor and everything else, the self-nullification, which is all very important, but when we do it through the Ahavas Yisroel level, this fundamental, all-encompassing level also results in that we're going to be complete with God, and that God sees us as being entirely beautiful. This actually ends the Derech Mitzvosecha part of the Maamar. And then the end of Derech Mitzvosecha part of the Maamar references, by the way, see further in this Maamar Vechalza from the Chabad Rebbe.